A few words about our history. Canada's first national park was created at Banff in the Canadian Rocky Mountains in 1885, and next week I'll have the pleasure to be in Western Canada to take part in ceremonies that will commemorate the 125th anniversary of the establishment of the park. And the agency and the organizations that preceded it have been around since 1911. So there has been an organization in the Government of Canada that has been responsible for administering national parks and national historic sites since 1911. So what is the mandate that we have been charged to undertake on behalf of the people of Canada? It's stated very simply on the screen in front of you. We protect and present nationally significant examples of Canada's natural and cultural heritage and foster public understanding, appreciation, and enjoyment in ways that ensure ecological and commemorative integrity. Now, there's one important point that I'd like to make about this mandate, and it's illustrated for you on the next slide. I think that at different times there has been a tendency for agencies involved in the conservation of both cultural and natural heritage to be largely focused on protection and conservation. And those are clearly aspects that are fundamental to the mandate of Parks Canada. However, we can never forget that we also have a mandate related to education, and we also have a mandate related to the visitor experience. So what is the experience of the citizen when he or she comes to our places and experiences this heritage firsthand? So it's not any one of those mandate elements that we put higher than another. It's really the combination of protection, education, and visitor experience that give the mandate that we exercise its real strength. We've also developed a vision for the organization, which is what we would like these places that we administer to represent for Canadians across the country. And I won't read the vision to you, but there are several words that I would like to bring to your attention. One of the key aspects of the vision statement on the screen is the idea of connecting hearts and minds to the places that we administer. The aspect of connecting hearts and minds to the places really speaks to the visitor experience that I mentioned on the last slide. And we are convinced that this is an absolutely fundamental aspect of the work that we carry out because it raises the issue of relevance, and the issue of relevance is absolutely critical. If we're irrelevant, and if the work that we do on behalf of Canadians is irrelevant, then we cannot expect to enjoy public support, nor can we expect to enjoy the support of the different governments who may be in charge of the government at any given point in time. So the question I'd like to ask, and it's a question that we consider to debate at home, is how can we ensure that this heritage, whether it's natural heritage or whether it's cultural heritage, remains relevant to present and future generations of citizens given the societal changes that are taking place? And you only have to think of youth. I have two children, both of whom are very technologically savvy. And the question that I ask myself is, how can I make this heritage that I care about relevant to them and relevant to their generation? And I think that that question is particularly acute at a time when people in the heritage industry, if I can call it that, are facing increasingly difficult competition from so many other aspects of the way in which citizens can spend their time. And so this is an issue that we continue to consider very carefully. Another fundamental question which the vision raises is how we can facilitate citizens approaching this heritage on their own terms. So in other words, how can we bring them in and how can we engage them effectively, and not only when we want to, but when they want to and on their terms. So quickly, Parks Canada is responsible for administering 167 National Historic Sites. We provide expertise in fields such as archaeology, and we contribute to the protection of many different things, including heritage railway stations, federal heritage buildings, heritage lighthouses, and even the grave sites of Canada's prime ministers. We're also responsible for administering 42 national parks across the country. Our largest national park is Wood Buffalo National Park, located in northern Canada. And to give you a sense of its scale, it's roughly 44,000 square kilometers. Parks Canada is also heavily involved with the tourism industry. We are the largest provider of natural and cultural tourism products in Canada, and we had over 22 million visits in 2008, 2009, and we work very, very closely with the tourism industry right across the country. And to give you an example of that, we issued over 2,500 business licenses for activities that take place in and around our places every year. For every dollar that's spent by Parks Canada, we've calculated that we leverage about $4, so at a 4-to-1 ratio. And it's interesting to note that about 45% of these expenditures are made by visitors who are non-Canadians who come to our places. In terms of Kluane National Park Reserve, which is in northern Canada, it protects a nationally significant example of Canada's North Coast mountains, but it's also of tremendous cultural significance to the communities who are located nearby, mostly Canada's First Nations. And what we've tried to do in the case of Kluane, in the context of one initiative called Healing Broken Connections, is to improve the ecological health of the park while integrating the community and helping the community and the First Nations people reestablish their historic and traditional connection to the land. So quite beyond any effect that the park might have in terms of tourism and economic spin-offs, this is also very clearly a cultural and a social element which is of very great importance. Moving now to a National Historic Site, the Fortress of Louisbourg on eastern Canada. It's the largest reconstructed 18th century fortress in North America. There are over 60 reconstructed buildings and associated features. And interestingly, it was reconstructed in the 1960s, not only for its historical significance, but also as a way to provide employment and generate economic activity in a depressed region of the country. Since the 1960s, it has remained a tourism linchpin in that particular portion of eastern Canada. It serves as a primary tourist attraction on Cape Breton Island, and it has made that area of the country a tourism destination and is strongly featured in both regional and provincial tourism marketing campaigns. So another example of the economic effect that a place like this can actually have. Spending by Parks Canada, we estimate that visitors spend about $2.68 billion a year visiting our places, and that can be added to the expenditures made by Parks Canada of about $0.58 billion for a total of $3.26 billion, which is a reasonable amount of economic activity. In terms of the effect on gross domestic product, we have calculated that that amounts to a $2.98 billion contribution to gross domestic product, and a spin-off effect of over 41,000 full-time jobs right across the country. And I think it's important to emphasize that given the location of many of our national parks and our national historic sites, these are often in remote or rural parts of the country where these particular jobs are often very, very highly sought after. So another very distinct economic benefit. And something governments are always interested in. We believe we also provide over $200 million a year in tax revenue to governments at both the federal and at the provincial levels. We've broken it down into economic effects of national parks, which are, as you can see, make up the bulk of the effects. And we've also broken out the impacts in terms of national historic sites. And so put together again, we think it's a significant economic impact, which is a distinct contribution that's made by both natural as well as cultural heritage in Canada. To conclude, there are a number of key points that I'd like to make. Clearly, we believe that Parks Canada plays a significant role in Canada's tourism economy. We believe that there are clear benefits economically, both nationally, regionally, and locally. Annual program and visitor expenditures support healthy local communities. And visitor spending makes significant contributions to GDP, employment, and taxes. But an important aspect to highlight is that visitation is a key to revenue, and relevance, the point that I spoke about earlier, is key not only to visitation, but to establishing those connections between citizens and their heritage. And then finally, the final point that I'll make is that beyond economic benefits, these places, these very special places, provide profound environmental, social, and cultural benefits to Canadians. And we feel that it's important to consider not only the economic effects that heritage can have, but also these extremely important other benefits. Thank you very much. Grazie.
Grazie molto, dottor Ossola, per un'ottima presentazione. Grazie mille. Ci saranno altre domande che poi le farò magari, perché ci sono molte cose interessanti che ha detto. Passo velocemente a Cynthia McLeod, che è sovrintendente dell'Independence National Park di Philadelphia. È un posto veramente, chi non c'è stato ci dovrebbe andare, e soprattutto per distruggere il mito, lo stereotipo che in America non c'è storia, che negli Stati Uniti non c'è storia. Lì veramente è la culla della civilizzazione americana e della storia recente degli Stati Uniti. Cynthia.
Grazie, buonasera. I bring greetings from the Director of the National Park Service to you all, especially to Mayor Renzi, and to Mr. Gentili, the president of this forum, and especially also to my colleagues on the dais and the dignitaries in the room. My subject is the National Park Service in the United States and its role in supporting cultural heritage tourism. I'll cover 5 points that I think are important for success, and I've heard lots about these from others as well. First is that these are beloved places. On the screen you see the Liberty Bell with Independence Hall in the background. Independence Hall Tower is undergoing a $4.5 million caretaking of its structure, of its actually cladding at the moment. So they're beloved places. We have a very strong identity brand in the National Park Service, to the extent that although we are part of the federal government, and I report to the director and he reports to the Secretary of the Interior and reports to the President, people don't think we are actually part of the federal government. We have key partnerships. Systematically, over the decades of the National Park Service, we have built webs of influence and mutual support throughout the country. And then finally, we have innovative leaders, many of them women, and a dedicated workforce. I had to say that. Our mission is dual. It is to preserve these places in perpetuity. That's a long time. And also to provide for the enjoyment of current and future generations. In the United States, historic preservation was initially a privately financed concern. This is a drawing of Mount Vernon, George Washington's home just outside Washington, D.C. And this was preserved in the mid-19th century privately. Most historic preservation, especially in the East, is undertaken on an individual basis, and I think this is from our heritage of the land being given by the British King to various individuals. Private property rights are still very, very important, and land use and its conservation and preservation is mostly determined locally. And there we go. Vast amounts of land in the western United States, however, is still owned by the federal government, since it was claimed by the United States government in the late 19th century and even 20th century, if you're talking about Hawaii and Alaska. Recognition that there were places, natural places of extraordinary scenic value that should belong to all of the people in our country came relatively late in our country's history. The formation of the first national park, Yellowstone, in 1872, as well as the beginning of the National Park Service as a component of the federal government in 1916, were the results actually of strong partnerships that reflected innovative, forward, and systemic, I should say, thinking of national leaders, corporations, and private citizens. Even though we had a relatively late start, we feel that the United States and other U.S. land management programs have demonstrated their value in several ways. By having a systemic approach with standards, scientific research, and funding to take physical care of the natural and cultural resources, and by making these resources available and interesting to visitors, the parks and protected areas have intrinsic value and also generate significant economic benefits to surrounding regions. None of these benefits could have been achieved by the government alone without public-private partnerships, as I mentioned. and authentic, caring leaders and staff.